Good day. That there are some people within the US administration, including presumably President Biden himself, who are anxious to place Russian US relations on an even keel after a fraught period of confrontation, is strongly suggested by a telephone conversation which took place between a senior official of the US administration and a senior official of the Kremlin on 19th April 2021. The two officials in question were Jacob Sullivan, who is President Biden's national security advisor, and Nikolay Patrushev, who is the secretary of Russia's Security Council. Now, Patrushev is not a well-known person in the West, though he is extremely well-known in Russia, where he is known as a very powerful official indeed. The Security Council, of which he is secretary, is Russia's primary decision-making body. It meets every Tuesday, chaired by Putin, with Patrushev as secretary, preparing the council's agenda, obviously following discussion with Putin. The Security Council, Russia's Security Council, does not just consider foreign, defense and security policy, but is also concerned with economic and domestic issues. It is, in effect, Russia's primary decision-making body, its cabinet, if you will. Moreover, Patrushev is not just its secretary, as Putin's major advisor on national security issues. He is also the person who, it seems, coordinates the intelligence agencies, Russia's major intelligence agencies, and who briefs Putin on intelligence information and security information from around the world. Patrushev, like Putin, is, by the way, a former intelligence officer and was at one time director of the FSB, Russia's primary counterintelligence agency. So he has something of the functions of a national security advisor, like Jacob Sullivan does. Some of the same functions, which he combines with the functions of the US Director of National Intelligence, and he also has a say in domestic policy. He is, in effect, a more important official within the Russian hierarchy than Jacob Sullivan is in the United States. Now, Patrushev is also a well-known hardliner. He is not someone who has any illusions about the United States or about its foreign policy. So Sullivan, in conducting a dialogue with Patrushev, is speaking to an official who is both extremely powerful and someone who is known to be skeptical of the United States and skeptical of US declarations of good intentions and something of a hardliner to boot. Now, we have two readouts of these calls, one from the Russian side, one from the American. The American one is extremely brief and it appears on the White House website, and it reads as follows. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke by phone today with Nikolay Patrushev, Secretary of the Russian Security Council. The two discussed a number of issues in the bilateral relationship, as well as regional and global matters of concern. Mr. Sullivan and Secretary Patrushev also discussed the prospect of a presidential summit between the United States and Russia and agreed to continue to stay in touch. That is a very brief readout. Note that this is not the first conversation that Patrushev and Sullivan have had with each other. There have in fact been 3 conversations since Sullivan was appointed National Security Advisor after the Biden-Harris administration was inaugurated. Note something else about this readout from the American side. It contains no reference to Ukraine. There are none of the ritual declarations about the United States standing unfalteringly and unwaveringly behind Ukraine and supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. There is no reference to Ukraine at all. The Russians, for their part, have given a much more detailed readout, as is now standard. And this readout has been published on the Russian Security Council's own website. And it reads as follows. Nikolay, Patrushev and Jacob Sullivan discussed the preparations for the summit meeting, as well as possible directions in the development of Russian-American cooperation. An exchange of views took place on a number of problems on the international agenda. The importance of the early launch of a bilateral mechanism for strategic stability, the need for interaction between Russia and the United States on the nuclear problem of the Korean Peninsula, on the situation around the Iranian nuclear program, was emphasized. Problems related to the participation of the two states in the Open Skies Treaty were touched upon. The Russian side pointed out the inadmissibility of US interference in the internal affairs of the Russian Federation and its allies, and the groundlessness and lack of evidence of the accusations against Russia, on the basis of which the White House introduced a package of anti-Russian sanctions. Despite the unconstructive steps of the American side, leading to further degradation of bilateral relations, the Russian side reaffirmed their readiness to continue the dialogue in the interests of normalizing relations between Moscow and Washington and ensuring international stability. Note, once again, no reference to Ukraine in this readout. Now that is really very remarkable, given that Ukraine is at the epicenter of the crisis between Russia and the United States at this time. I suspect that discussions about the situation in Ukraine did take place, but they are so sensitive that the Russians and the Americans agreed that there would be no disclosure in these readouts of what Patrushev and Sullivan said to each other. I'm not going to try and guess, at least not to any great extent, what those discussions about Ukraine were, but my guess is, and this is all I'm going to say on this issue, on this topic, that they involved means to arrange for the pullout of Ukrainian troops from the contact line between Ukraine and the 2 breakaway republics of the Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, in a way that would not lead to a political crisis in Ukraine and to the humiliation of President Zelensky. I suspect, and again, this is all I'm going to say on this issue, that Patrushev, for his part, will have emphasized to Sullivan the need for an comprehensive settlement of the Ukrainian issue based on Putin's ideas for a reactivation of the Minsk process, which requires direct talks between Ukraine and the leaders of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, something which Ukraine has been resisting, but something which we know Putin floated in his conversation with President Biden which Putin and Biden had recently. By the way, we also learn from the Russian Security Council website that just as it was Biden who took the decision to telephone Putin, so it was Sullivan who took the decision to telephone Patrushev. Anyway, putting aside the question of Ukraine, which, as I said, I strongly suspect was the major topic discussed in this call, what can we take from it? Well, I think the most important words are these. An exchange of views took place on a number of problems on the international agenda. Well, I'm sure that covers Ukraine. The importance of the early launch of a bilateral mechanism for strategic stability, the need for interaction between Russia and the United States on the nuclear problem of the Korean Peninsula, on the situation around the Iranian nuclear program, was emphasized. Now, the key words here are the early launch of a bilateral mechanism. That suggests some proposal to set up some kind of mechanism whereby the United States and Russia talk over problems between each other, cutting out, by the way, the Europeans, cutting out the Ukrainians on a regular basis, and do so bilaterally. That seems to be the prime topic of discussion. On the substance, the Russians are clearly not giving an inch, and they are not at the moment interested or considering any sort of concessions. But the United States, or at least the Biden-Harris administration, does seem to be looking for some kind of structured mechanism for a dialogue on international questions with Russia. What that will mean in practice, and whether that mechanism, assuming it's ever set up, will have any real effect, that, of course, is an entirely different question. I have to say that all these discussions, whether they lead to a summit or not, are hopeful in themselves, but we must not discount the enormous obstacles that stand in their way. It's known that the administration, President Biden presumably, Jacob Sullivan, who seems to be the person who is pushing hardest for some sort of restart of a dialogue with Russia, definitely, wanted to appoint to the National Security Council an academic, Matthew Rozhansky, who is known to be a supporter of maintaining some kind of a dialogue with Russia. The reaction to Rozhansky's appointment, however, has been telling. Hardliners in the National Security Council and in the administration leaked the fact that Rozhansky was being considered to Axios, and articles started to appear in Axios, in Politico, in Washington Examiner, interpreting Rozhansky's appointment as a sign of US appeasement by the Biden administration of Russia. As a result, it seems that Rozhansky's possible appointment has now been blocked, and Sullivan, if it is indeed he who is pushing the idea of some kind of dialogue with Russia, now finds himself without the support of a key aide that he had relied upon in broaching this idea of a dialogue and presumably of a summit. In other words, the obstacles to a dialogue with Russia in the United States remain immense, and, by the way, there have also been a slew of articles in parts of the media, especially in Britain, which suggest growing disquiet on the part of some people, not just in the United States, but in Britain and in other hardline allies of the United States at the prospect of a Putin-Biden summit. On their part, the Russians are clearly very skeptical, and we notice again all these very strong words in the Russian readout. The Russian side pointed out the inadmissibility of US interference in the internal affairs of the Russian Federation and its allies. In other words, the Russians are saying no more counter-revolutions, no more support for people like Navalny in Russia, no more operation of US NGOs in Russia or in other Russian allied states. And of course, we know from the counter-sanctions that the Russians are imposing, and which I discussed in a recent video, that the Russians are taking steps to close down those NGOs which are operating in Russia. So no more of that, and also comments like these, that the Russian side pointed out the inadmissibility and groundlessness and lack of evidence of the accusations against Russia on the basis of which the White House introduced a package of anti-Russian sanctions. And we learn that Patrushev spoke about the fact that these were unconstructive steps leading to a further degradation of bilateral relations. So the Russians are deeply skeptical and very guarded about this process. And of course, Patrushev, who, as I said, is a well-known hardliner, deeply skeptical of the United States, is giving away nothing. And Sullivan, for his part, will find Patrushev a polite but hardline interlocutor. Nonetheless, some steps towards normalizing relations do seem to be underway. That, of course, was not what many people expected, especially people, by the way, in the United States and Britain expected when the Biden-Harris administration was inaugurated. Recently, Scott Ritter, former US intelligence officer, very well informed about the situation in Washington, took the view that with the recent sanctions that the United States imposed, the anti-Russian community within the US government, the Neocons and their various supporters, have reached a high water mark, that their influence from now on will decline as the reality of Russian power, as the impossibility of the United States taking any further steps against Russia in the event of strong Russian action in Ukraine, as all of these realities start to gain hold in Washington, and as people within the US bureaucracy start to recognize these realities. Well, these moves by Sullivan and possibly by President Biden himself do suggest that there are some people in the United States who are starting to think in this way. But détente? Well, we shall see. The odds against that, it seems to me, remain extremely high. And the Russians, as I said, remain deeply skeptical. Thank you for joining me on this program, on this channel. Please join me also for future programs, also on this channel. Please also remember to check out our other programs, which we do on our main channel, the Duran, myself and my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also check out Alex's channel. You'll find links under this video. Please check us out also on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey. Please also support us to the extent that you can on via Patreon, Subscribestar, and PayPal. And remember, we accept donations in other currencies, all currencies, including all the new ones. Please also check out our Discord server, and of course go to our shop, see the wonderful things we have there, our amazing shirts, our sweatshirts, our hoodies, our hats, and our famous magic mugs. And remember, you support the Duran by buying these fabulous products. Please also check out our Discord server, and remember to subscribe to this channel and to all our other channels. And check your subscription also as well. And thank you for joining me on this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel and on our other channels. And until then, have a wonderful day.